Hi, guys.
Hey!
I'm
Hello.
Lexi,
And I'm Danny, and this is
Girl Preach
Jennifer.
Podcast. We
Girl
have
Preach
a
Podcast.
special guest today, and her name is Jennifer. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Rollman.
Yep. She's one of our really good friends from the town that we live in, and I actually worked with her whenever I was working at the mental health clinic. She is a counselor.
Yes, I am a therapist for the same mental health agency that you worked at.
Yes, and she's a really great coworker, in case you guys are wondering. She answered every single question that I ever had. But we just thought that it would be a really good idea. We've actually talked about this since the release of the very first episode we did, having a conversation about mental health and how it relates to Christianity. And who better to do that with than Jennifer here? So that's what we're doing today.
Yes.
Yes. So, since you're the therapist, what do you think mental health has to do with the Bible and all that goes in there?
Well, I think that there is a profound impact on the stigmatizing and stereotyping with mental health in Christianity. But I feel like there's a lot of biblical truths that kind of back the belief that mental health issues have been, an ongoing thing. I mean, the Bible says we're in a fallen world and we're going to have suffering. And so I just think that some of the statistics and things are staggering as far as like pastors and preachers go in regard to impacts of mental health in the church and not being able to be open with your mental health in church.
Which is sad because the Bible gives us plenty of examples of people who struggle with the same exact things that we see people struggling with today, and how they were treated in the Bible and cared for, and then how we turn around and care for them. Sometimes, though, it almost comes off as, I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but sometimes people will ask, like, oh, does anybody have any prayer requests or things to share? And it almost becomes like this is my time to share it because I want prayers. But then it also kind of pushes people into gossip. Like, oh, did you hear about so-and-so who's going through this or this? And I think that as a church, we haven't created a safe place, like you said, to share our struggles and what we're going through.
I think for a long time, like anxiety and depression and like being on medication, like if that's the route that you need or you choose to go or whatever, I think for a long time, like there was just such a misconception about that, like in the church, like growing up, it just kind of was like, I don't know if it was ever verbally taught or if it was just kind of like something that was just out there that like to be on medication for that, like it was sinful. Like it wasn't, you weren't putting your trust in God. You weren't believing enough. You weren't relying on Christ enough. And so for me, like me personally dealing with like my depression, especially after I had my kids, getting on medication, I had to break like a lot of different like strongholds that were built up by the church in my mind growing up because I felt like, well, if I feel this depressed or like I'm struggling postpartum and I need medication, I must be doing something wrong. There must be something wrong with my faith. There must be something wrong with my relationship with God because I don't feel fulfilled right now. Like I'm like going through it. And I think that that's like a huge misconception that like the Christian church had, and I think it's more talked about now, but I still think that in traditional church settings that can be a belief of people our age and even in like the older generation and maybe the younger, but I think specifically our generation and older.
Right. I know, I grew up in, I I always say it a very religious family because I feel like there's a very big difference in Christianity and religion.
Mm-hmm.
And so even to this day, and I'm a mental health professional, I'm a therapist. But I have a parent that doesn't believe in therapy, and that, you know, if your relationship with God, you shouldn't need that. You should get everything that you need fulfilled through God. And it's it's almost a hindrance, and we become a barrier or a stumbling block to our brothers and sisters in Christ when we have that perspective or mentality. And I just look at some of like the people in the Bible, like King David had significant struggles with deep sorrow, feeling despair. I mean, read the book of Psalms.
Dude was
Yeah.
depressed.
He was
He
Yeah.
was going
depressed.
through it. Yes.
He poured his heart out to God, but you know, he needed people around him and supportive too.
Mm-hmm.
And um Elijah, he was very depressed. And I mean, to the point that he had to ask God to take his life. Like
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
borderline suicidal. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and
I,
but instead of us walking, like, I feel like the Bible and these stories in the Bible, like Job had significant life struggles
Mm-hmm.
that over time weighed on him. Um, you have grief in the Bible, that like immense grief. I was trying to think. I I hope I'm not wrong, but I'm pretty sure Naomi was like really struggling with
yeah.
grief after she lost her husband
Yeah. She
in the
changed her
Bible.
name. She was
She changed her name to Mara. Yeah.
bitter.
Which, what
Yes.
does that mean?
Bitter.
Bitter. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
But
And
it's
I
funny
just
because
don't.
they still call her Naomi. Like, never once
Yeah.
is she referred to as bitter. They're like,
Yeah.
no, homegirl, that is not your name. We are not calling you that.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
how you feel. That's not who you are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Um but it's just like one of those things where I feel like these are raw and real vulnerabilities that are shown by great people in the Bible
Mhm.
to show us that those are struggles and things that we will have in our Christian walk too.
Mm-hmm.
Not one of these people or examples are someone who was just so sinful and removed from God that that's why they were experiencing those things.
Right.
Mm-hmm. I put
I,
down
oh, sorry, go ahead.
sorry.
Yeah,
I put down the Elijah story too because
same.
not only was he so depressed that he asked God to take his life, but this man just came out of a great battle, you know, like he and the interactions that he was having with the pagan religions and the pagan God that he was challenging in that time, he just came off of a very high with God. And for him to go from there to the deep low that he felt shows us that those of us walking with Christ, we're not separated from those feelings and we're not protected from those feelings. You know, God lets us go through all of those times. And it's wild to me that people think the simple answer, like you said, you should be relying on God, you should be putting that on God. People say that expecting the Christian life to be an easy breezy walk with no trials, nothing, and they don't realize that if all of these people in the Bible had to go through the different challenges that they had to go through, even when it comes to mental health and not just physical challenges, why wouldn't we also have to go through those ourselves?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I think I also took notes over Elijah. I think we all, but
Yeah.
I mean, it's such
He's
like
a go-to.
it's a good account. Like
Mm-hmm.
like you said, he had just like topped like these spiritual highs. Like he had been like fighting, like these spiritual victories, and then he hit this wall, and like I almost having been in ministry before, I know that feeling of just you're doing so much, like God's helping you, like you have all these victories, your church is growing, you've had several people come to Christ, you're discipling new people, but you're pouring yourself out over and over and over again, and you're burnout. And it's just like this wall that you hit. And I love how God brought him out of that. He led him to rest. He gave him food. He took a nap, and then he got up and he went on with his,
Yeah.
his little, like the rest of the chapter. But I just love that because I took notes on that. I was like, he ate and he took a nap. And I'm like, that is so important. Like, even that, like, I mean, we talk about self-care and things like that. But honestly, like, even Elijah needed that. He needed rest. He needed to retreat. He needed to spend time by himself and with the Lord. He needed a good meal. And then when he woke up, he went about, his calling, and, this, like, his story continues. But I just kind of put that in there. Like, self-care is important. Like, when you're feeling burnout, when you're feeling down, take a nap, eat a good meal, wake up and see how you feel,
Yes, and even Jesus Christ had to have
Yeah.
that time in solitude and of
Yeah.
rest before he completed what he was here for. Like, I think that we don't, like, I don't know. I think that at times we focus on all of the you should or you shouldn't of things without taking into account grace and like
Yeah.
showing each other grace, showing ourself grace of that self-care.
Mm-hmm.
And I know in when I was in grad school and then even into clinical practice, you have people who are religious. This is rural Oklahoma where I work in Bible Belt. So they want to know, like, how are you tying in your clinical practice for those who really want that component? And I feel like it's all intertwined. We call it in the mental health field Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But like right down to Elijah, God's like, you need to rest. You need to refill yourself. You need to give your body rest. You need to give your mind a rest. You need to nourish yourself. Eat some bread. And then, and even the first time, he told him to go back to sleep and eat again. Sleep and eat again. I mean,
Yeah.
so we don't, I think that when we're kind of picking apart someone struggling with their mental health, we need to reflect on the biblical truths because it is hard in the secular world. There's a lot of things that fall under that. But it is relevant in our Christian walk too.
I mean, even Christ struggled. I mean, not saying he struggled, like, he had anxiety in the Garden of Gethsemane. I can't talk. He goes and he's praying, and it says, he says, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. And then he continues, my Father, if it's possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will. And it says that he had sweat like blood. And I'm like, that he is in distress. He is, like, I mean, that is anxiety. Like, he is praying, like he's overwhelmed to the point of death. Like, God, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do it. He's going through it in the garden when he's praying. And I'm like, that right there shows me that, Christ is sinless. Anxiety is not a sin. It's nothing to be ashamed of. But what I do think anxiety can be, because I do believe that medical help is necessary in some cases, but I think in also some cases spiritual help, or in all cases spiritual help is necessary. And sometimes it is a spiritual attack. Sometimes it is Satan, and he is attacking you. And I think that in those times, oh, I lost my place, sorry. In those times, well, we do that a lot. It's just so necessary to remember that it's not a sin. Christ struggled with it. and we need to take it to the throne, and we need to leave it there, and that's so much easier said than done. Like, I have struggled with it, so I understand.
I have too. Anxiety's been a lifelong struggle for me, and the social interaction, it like the amount of work it takes sometimes to just show up. When showing up, once I get there, I'm good. It's just getting from where I'm at to where I'm going. And one thing that I always have kind of rooted myself in and reminded myself of is, like the armor of God, and that, Satan is attacking us. We are, Ephesians, I have noted here Ephesians 6:12, like we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against cosmic powers over the present darkness, against spiritual forces of evil in heavenly places. And that's kind of like what you were saying, Danielle. Like, Satan wants us to feel isolated and alone. Our spiritual wellness is just as important for our mental health.
Yeah.
I would honestly argue that it's more important, because whether you're living in the secular world or if you're following Christ, it's still spiritual warfare. It's still Satan attacking you. It's just in the secular world, you might not have a name for it, and you might not understand where these feelings are coming from. Whereas for us who know the spiritual warfare, we're able to say, this is Satan. And we're going through the same feelings and the same emotions, but there's more hope there on the Christian side. Whereas on the secular side, because they don't know the gravity of what they're having to go through, they don't know how to find the right help until they go seek out the help, right? Like, until they go to a counselor and be vulnerable to them and let them help them. And because, I think that mental health doesn't have as big of a stamina on it anymore as it did in the past. But even in the secular world, people weren't going to seek counselors because they were seen as weak, or you should be able to just do this, or suck it up and go do your job, And so I think that, like, as we're getting farther, people are seeking help more, but there's still a stamina around it where people are scared to go get help. I was talking to one of our kids the other day who he's struggling with grief right now. And he was saying that he won't let himself cry because he's not supposed to. And I'm like, but we were created to cry, like God made us to cry and to weep and to mourn and to feel all of these things. And I was like, it doesn't make you any less of a person to go through that. And he's one of those who really does like to isolate himself. And I'm like, that's going to make it worse if you isolate yourself. Like, we're called to have community. And you see that when Christ did his garden thing, he took people with him, and Elijah did struggle alone, but God sent an angel to help him. And then even though the people weren't the best influences, Job still had community there too. Like, there were people with him in that. And so community is such a big thing. And I think that when people are struggling with mental health and they don't think that they're worth help, they don't think that they need help, they think that it makes them less of a person, or whatever is holding them back from getting help, Satan's winning because he's pushing them more and more into that isolation.
Yeah. I feel that. I'm one that likes to self-isolate. Like, when we went through everything leaving our last church, like, I didn't want to be around anybody. I didn't want to talk to anybody. Like, I just wanted to, it was like almost a whole year. And like, I do get social anxiety, but on the flip side, I do feel like sometimes, like most of the time, I am pretty like sociable. Like, I don't know. And I feel like when I'm in my lows, because I do go through some high highs and low lows, I feel like I do self isolate. And it is the hardest thing to turn to God and be like, I need you to help me, and I need you to help me pull out of this, because I don't want to pull myself out of it, But it's like, I have just learned over the course of like maybe the last like 4 years or so that I have to pull myself out of it. Like when I'm feeling like I want to self-isolate, I have to get myself dressed. I have to go to town. Like I have to do something that's going to make me, even if it's just driving through and getting a coffee at Seven Brew, I have to be able to talk to other people or I'm going to be in bed for days. And I'm like, I can't do that as a stay-at-home mom. Like I have to be able to take care of my kids and function. But it's so stinking hard because when I'm in those like in those lows, I don't even want to talk to my kids. Like I don't want to talk to anybody, and it's hard. It's hard to ask God to pull you out of that when that's the last thing that you want to do. If that makes sense.
And that's when you need that community and connection most.
Yeah.
And when we don't have those relationships with others that we truly are living authentic with, like not the person we're presenting ourselves as, but who we really are, what our struggles really are, and being able to be real with, you don't have that community to pull you out of it if you don't have that safe space, like Lexi had mentioned, of people to fellowship with and see when we're supposed to be doing life together. We're not supposed to be doing it on our own.
Yeah.
Like the Bible says, two are better than one. And this is in regards to, you can apply that to almost any situation. You're not meant to do it alone.
Right.
And it's in those times of isolation that Satan can really get a stronghold on our thoughts.
And he does. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I put that in my notes. I forgot to find the reference, but I wrote it and I was going to get the reference later, but then I was running to get here. But I think I want to say it's in Ephesians, but I could be wrong. But that verse that says, pity the person who falls and has nobody there to help them up. And it's what you were talking about when two or more, like two are better than one. And it's like when two are walking and one falls, the other person can help them get up and vice versa. But pity the fool who falls and there's nobody there to help him up. I don't remember where that's at, but it's in the Bible, I promise. But that's what that reminds me of, is whenever you say we're supposed to do community together, I will forever fight that battle that we should be doing community together, like in all aspects of our lives. And it's just because that verse is so relevant. Like, as Danielle said, because she has so many people who love her. So if she got into that self-isolating mindset and she's laying in bed all day and she didn't have a community around her, there's not going to be a single person reaching out to her. And she probably knows if she ignored everybody on her phone reaching out to her, somebody's eventually going to come to her house because she has such a community around her. And so if you don't build those communities and those relationships with other people when you go through the hardest times of your life, because we're all going to go through them. I don't know why these people out there preaching the prosperity gospel think that they're going to have the perfect lives, but they're not. And you have to create that community. And we're going to do another episode on this later, but I think that's why AI is so scary, is because people are staying in their houses, only communicating with like fake people out there, and they have nobody around them. And it's because they don't want to get out and go do anything or be around people.
I see it every day so I'm based in a middle school. I work with 12 to 14-year-olds every single day. And they, outside of social media, that's their real world, which is sad because that's a highlight reel of what people want you to know. That's not the real world.
Yeah.
But the number of mental health issues, the number of adolescents experiencing suicidal thoughts is staggering. And I know that it's because we're not connected to each other in a real way. They're connected to online personas, which is not an authentic person self. And I'm not posting on Facebook today. I had a hard time leaving my house because I wasn't feeling my best self and didn't want to run into somebody.
Yeah.
But, I am going to post a happy picture where I went and traveled somewhere. Like, it's just a highlight reel of things. We're not showing our real self. So we're giving them a false, and by we, I just mean if we're allowing access to our adolescents, A false sense of what reality really is. And
It's
then
like
you
a
see
highlight
that,
reel of all the highs in people's lives. Like you're
yes.
not seeing the lows, you're not seeing the struggle, like you're just seeing the good things. That's not real life.
Yeah, I did an emergency session today at the end of I literally didn't leave my office until almost 7 o'clock tonight because
Mm.
a TikTok influencer committed suicide. And it was a child. I think they were like 13, maybe. And it affected this person so greatly. And like they sat there making me watch TikTok after TikTok. And like, you're a therapist. Could you tell that they were depressed? You would never know that they were wanting to do this. And it's getting people to be aware. Like, you're not seeing the reality of someone's life on social media.
Yeah, you can be
Yeah.
whoever you want to be on social media. I think
Yeah.
that we see that with the actors and actresses that one day is in the news for committing suicide, and you're like, they were the funniest person. Like, I would have never saw that person. Like, they were always talking to people, they were always doing things. And I
Yeah.
think that people don't realize that it's so easy to hide what you're deeply struggling with. And it's only the people who really know you that's ever going to be like, hey, wait a minute, something's going on with you right now. We need to talk about it.
Yeah.
And are we allowing the space for that to happen? Because I had in preparation for this, because I think it's really important, like for us to understand the humanness of our leadership in church.
Mm-hmm.
I found a study from 2023 where they interviewed 523 pastors across the United States from August 28th to September 6th or 18th in 2023. And throughout that study, 26% of them said that they had considered taking their own life. And there was only 9% of them that didn't disclose having struggles with their mental health that they felt like they couldn't open up about because they're held in a position to where we don't allow our pastors or preachers to be human beings. We expect out of them more than what is humanly possible. We set a level of expectation on them, which Danielle probably knows this better than anybody.
Oh,
I'm
girl,
just
I
an
do.
outsider looking in.
Yeah.
But I see the pressures and things that our pastors and preachers are faced with, and then the standard that we hold them to that's so unrealistic as human beings.
I can really, I mean, I can identify with Elijah. Like I was saying earlier, like having been in ministry, and it's like you're pouring out so much, and you are pouring into people's lives, and you're there for everybody. And this goes back to the community. I mean, this makes me emotional talking about it, but, you're there. You go to the basketball games, you go to the football games, you're pouring into the community, you're pouring into your church members, you're going to the birthday parties, you're poor, like you don't have a minute to breathe, you're pouring out everything that you have, and then when you need people, they're not there. I remember throwing Nyla's first birthday party, and I had like maybe 5 people show up from the church. Like nobody showed up for us, nobody was there, and like that was something that was so little, but it hurt because it's like, man, I go to everybody's parties, I go to all of the basketball games, I go to everything, and I felt like no one was there when we needed them. And then I don't know, like the mental health, I have struggled. Chris never struggled with mental health until we entered the ministry. And then it was just an up and down, up and down. And like one minute I would be, you know, laid up in bed because I just was like so exhausted. I was so depleted mentally, spiritually, physically, like it was awful. And then I would feel, recharged. I would be okay. I'd come out of it, and then Chris would be that way. And it was just like an up and down, up and down. And he's never talked about his mental health, so I hope that he doesn't mind me. I doubt he minds me sharing, because it is the reality of so many pastors out there. And it's exhausting. But like, I can really identify with Elijah. Like, you have to take that time, you have to find that rest, you have to have a good meal, and you have to find the peace and be fully recharged, and then you can continue on. But even then, sometimes you feel like you're only continuing on at like 25%. Like, it's a
Right.
struggle. Like,
I can't.
ministry is the hardest thing I've ever done.
I can't imagine. I wanted to correct. I don't know if I misspoke or left this out, but 26% had mentioned thoughts of suicide, but 59% of the pastors said that they experienced deep depression in their ministry. And this is self-reported. So this isn't like clinical assessments.
Yeah.
This is a self-reported um online interview done by Barna, and which is a group that is private and a for-profit organization that addresses some mental health and issues for pastors. But they, I mean, that's 59 who answered honestly. How
Yeah.
many of those felt like they couldn't answer honestly?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think with that, also, like, I talked about like the physical burnout and like the pouring things out, but back to backtrack a little bit, most of it is spiritual attack. And I had no training as a pastor's wife. I mean, Chris had, we went to Bible college, we had ministry training, but we didn't know. And this is also where the church neglected in our discipling growing up, about spiritual warfare. Like, that wasn't something, even as we're in ministry, we were in ministry for 7 years, 6 years, or I think 7 years. But that just wasn't on my radar. It never crossed my mind. Like, I felt like my mind was so twisted and tangled with the anxiety and the depression and the highs and the lows. I never for a minute thought, is this spiritual warfare? And I was always just taking the blows, but I was never fighting back. And it was once we left ministry, it kind of all became crystal clear. And I was like, oh my gosh, that was spiritual warfare. That was a spiritual attack on me and my husband and our family for 7 years straight. I'm like, oh my goodness. Like, and I really started diving into how to fight these spiritual battles and how to, combat that, and not just, be on the defensive, not just the offensive, I guess. And yeah, like, I just want to throw that out there. Like, a lot of that is spiritual warfare.
Yeah. I would say a lot of it too is that the structure of the American church, and we've talked about this 1,000 times, is not what it's supposed to be. The entire church isn't supposed to be built on one person's back and his wife. And that's why we have deacons and all these other people who are supposed to contribute to the church, is because it's supposed to be a communal thing. Like, the church is supposed to be a community, not just a pastor and his congregation. And we're not doing the job correctly of the church. And so all the weight does get put onto the pastor. And that does lead to them having the struggles that they're struggling with. Plus, not only are they having, like Danielle said, the spiritual side of things, but then everybody has, like you said, the high expectations of, you have to do all of these things or else you're not a good pastor. And we're not even willing to do a quarter of the things that pastors have to do. And so a lot of, like, I could see those numbers being that high because we've set our pastors up to fail. Not only are we not creating a space for them to share their struggles, because, I mean, yes, there are guidelines to what a pastor needs to be able to do in order to be a pastor. But like Jennifer said, they're human, and we have to understand that they're human, that they're going to fall. And as long as they're seeking after Christ, we have to create that room for them to be able to share.
Yeah, and in knowing that, like, the same way that we need rest and we need fed, our leadership, our pastors, their wives, their families need that time too. And the same, I think it just goes back to everything you can tie back into a biblical truth. You know, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Like, it's that basic. Let's treat each other in Christ the way we would want to be treated if we were walking that same walk or dealing with those same struggles.
Right.
And I think the rest has to be more than just a couple days or a week, because living out here, you know, I was out here for 3 years, and I would go home. I would go back to Oklahoma every now and then, and I would do all these other things, but my entire life was encompassed in this ministry for 3 years. And not that it was a bad thing. I loved being here. I love these kids. But it does get really dark, and you don't really see when you're in the middle of it, like how much weight you're carrying. And so then when the other girl that worked here, she left, and she was gone for, I think, 3 months, or she was gone for a couple months. And then she was like, okay, well, I'm going to come back now. And so she came back. And then whenever I left, I was at the lowest that I could possibly be at. I was struggling. And when I left, I was back in Oklahoma for a couple months, and I'm like, I'm fine now. Like, I can go back. I can do more. I can keep going. It's just, we're not putting enough emphasis on like complete rest, like not having to worry about what's going on, not having to communicate with people, like being able to completely step out of that world that's encompassing your life, taking a good rest, and then you're ready to dive back in and you're ready to give more of yourself. Because one of the things that I was talking about out here when I was out here by myself, I was like, ministry was never meant to be like this, where it's just one person, because I felt like I was pouring out so much. It was during the time where they do their ceremonies, and we had a couple kids who were going through that process of being initiated into their tribe, or their groups. And then we had another kid who was struggling because her friends were going through that process, and she didn't understand like how she should feel. She thought she was going to lose her friends. And then we had another kid who was super depressed with his home life. And I felt like I was constantly like pouring out for these kids and trying to keep things together. And there was nobody left to pour back into me. And Jennifer, you had mentioned this earlier. People have the mindset of put everything back on God. Like, you should trust God enough. And I don't think it's a lack of trust in God. I just think that God's created us to have the community of believers to pour into each other, that you're not lacking trust in God whenever you're at those points. You're lacking community. You're lacking people to give you back what you're pushing out. That was my experience.
Even Jesus spent 40 days away in solitude to, you know, after he was tempted by Satan, to have some time before he picked his ministry back up. He didn't have one day of rest. He didn't have a weekend off that someone else covered his sermon. He took 40 days in solitude. And if that doesn't show you the weight of ministry, I don't know what will, because this is Jesus.
Yeah. It's heavy. And I think that even the names that we give Christ, you know, we call him counselor, helper, we call him all of these things. So why are we treating other people like they're horrible for seeking out help? I mean, I think, and this is my opinion, I think every single person would benefit from counseling in some way. Even if you're not going to an actual counselor, like having, like, that's what we do. We go to friends when we need advice, or when we're struggling, or when we need to be prayed for. We go to people for those services. And so, like, all of us need help. We all need counseling. We all have very low points. We all have very high points. But I think that as Christians, if we're pushing out the idea that counseling isn't okay, you shouldn't be seeking help, you should be fine, then when people get into those low points, they're going to be pushed even lower, because they're like, how are they so strong? How are they getting through things like this whenever they're going through it? I'm not good enough to get through this. Maybe my faith is lacking. And that's not the case at all.
Or when we have people around us with the mindset that, you know, if you're struggling, or if you feel like your mental health is struggling, then your relationship isn't on a firm foundation with God, then that holds you back on reaching out when you need help, because you're going to be in that mindset of, and I know I struggled in my earlier in my walk with my anxiety. I struggled a lot because I felt like if I am open about this, then it's going to make me look like I'm not strong in my faith. And that is how I associated the two, because that's how I was raised. And it's just really a hindrance to each other when we don't allow one another the space to be open and vulnerable, or, talk about real things going on. Then we're kind of robbing ourselves of the fellowship we could have with one another.
I kind of want to walk it back to the anxiety thing too, because kind of what you're saying, like people, you feel like you're afraid to come forward with like your anxiety or your depression because of the stigma around it, especially within like the church setting. But like, I feel like personally, I've always been an anxious person, and I've always equated anxiety with like bad, like anxiety with negative. And it's only been honestly within like the last year since moving home that I have realized that there is anxiety where I am stressed about everything. Like after I had Nyla, I had really bad postpartum anxiety. I worried about like the stupidest things, like afraid to carry her because I'm like, well, what if I drop her and she breaks her neck? Or like, just like stupid things, like unrational fears. But then there's also anxiety where like I'm cleaning house and I have this pit in my stomach and I just feel anxious for no reason. And over the course of the year, those have been the days where I've brushed it off and I've prayed, like, Lord, take this anxiety from me. Like, I like reach out to God. Like, I'm like, I need you to take this from me. But then, something later in the day ends up happening where, my grandparents are having to be rushed to the emergency room, or like something is happening major in my life. And I'm like, that wasn't me in my anxiety. That was my discernment telling me, hey, it's time to pray. Hey, you need to be on your knees. You need to be in communication with God. And it's almost like now I have to discern a little bit, okay, is this my anxiety, like my mental health anxiety, or is this like my spiritual anxiety where I need to get on my knees and I need to seek the Lord because there's something, and sometimes it's nothing, sometimes it's something, I don't know. But I just kind of want to throw that out there too, that like anxiety isn't always bad. Sometimes that's your discernment telling you that you need to pray and you need to seek God out for something.
Yes, and there's also value in seeking God. Like, I don't want to take away from the power of the church. Like, I commit to things at church. Like, I do the nursery. I'm not in a phase of life with littles, so it's not always the most comfortable situation to be in because my kids are grown now. But so it reminds me of that, how far I've come from that stage. But it's having those commitments within the church that help me. Like, I feel like I am relying on God and my positions within the church to help cope with that anxiety I feel.
Yeah.
I also feel like when I am struggling in certain areas, whether it be like comparison, or not being where, kind of where I think I should be. One of the biggest ways that I used my anxiety to grow my faith was through my parenting. I mean, I had my kids way too young at 17 and 19. And I struggled so much through my 20s in just being anxious that anything could happen. It's going to be because I was a teen parent. It's going to be because, like, I had to take a big step back and rely on God to remind me that, those children were a gift from Him.
Yeah.
He equipped me for those kids.
Mm-hmm.
And that ultimately they're His children. And so that shifted my parenting from parenting out of fear to parenting out of faith. Like, I knew these kids were God's kids. He equipped me to raise them, but He would not have given me these children if I wasn't capable. And I could have used that as the complete opposite. Like, why would God put me in this position to have kids this young, and with an incompetent 17-year-old mom? It could have went the whole other way, but I had strong, faith-filled people around me too. Shout out to Brenda Rogers, because her and Danielle's mom, Stephanie, carried me through a lot of those hard parenting years, because you're just so worried and full of anxiety because you're responsible for these precious lives. And when you already struggle with anxiety, it would get to the point sometimes of being debilitated. Like, I couldn't even leave the house with them because I was scared something might happen. Yeah. But allowing God to kind of intervene in that helped strengthen my faith in Him. But at the same time, I took anxiety medication, and I worked with a therapist to kind of work through some of those things within my own self to heal my own childhood issues that caused those anxieties within me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I've taken medication before, and I don't think it's anything to be ashamed of. I think that God provided doctors, and those doctors provided medication. And sometimes, like, especially like with me, when I was on them, it was after I had my kids, and there was hormonal imbalances there that I tried to fight through, and it was either my kids lost their mom or I take a pill, and I'm like, I'm taking the pill because my kids need their mom, like, and there's no shame in that at all. And I'm not on them anymore, but God used that, and I'm here now because of that. And I think that you can, once you kind of, for me, once I came out of it, like you can use it to grow your relationship with God. You can use it to grow your faith. Like, God uses anything and everything for His good. And I can see where He's used my depression and my anxiety for His good, and to grow my faith and to help others in theirs. And as hard as it was, I wouldn't take back those times.
Yeah. I've been going through, because I'm working on getting my master's as well, but I purposely picked a school that's going to incorporate a biblical worldview into my program, because when I'm at the end of it, I'll still have taken the same classes that any other program. It's a KCAP program, but any other KCAP program would require. But the professors also add that extra element. And so for a lot of our assignments, it's like if they're asking you to go to the Bible, see where this correlates, what's going on. And I remember we were going through the brain. We were talking about the different things, like the different parts of the brain and everything, and it was talking about the neuron connections. And it's like we create these pathways that we, every time we go through with the same experience, we like reinforce it, and those pathways get reinforced. But you can change those pathways. So no matter how much you've reinforced it, it can still be changed. And that's what we were talking about. And so whenever I was reading through that, I was like, that reminds me of how when we're reading through the Bible, it says that when you come to Christ, you're a new creation, the old is gone. And I know that that's not like an instant thing, that like we're becoming the new creation. We do that through the sanctification process, but we're having to retrain our brains. We're having to make new pathways. And like Danielle said, that when she was taking her medicine because of an hormone imbalance, there are real life things going on in people's bodies causing these reactions to be the way they are, be it diet or chemical imbalances or whatever it is going on. And not allowing people to seek out professional help, because God has blessed us with that now. Like He's blessed us with the knowledge to help these things.
Yeah.
And there shouldn't be people stopping you from going to seek that help. And I mean, it's up to you, because I know like medication does come with side effects. And I know there's people out there who's like, there's a more natural way. I'm going to find the natural way. Whatever works for you, but we shouldn't be putting each other down for what we choose to do and how we choose to go about fixing our bodies and the problems that we're having.
No, I agree 100%.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that just reinforces, our community and being there for one another, and not allowing each other to kind of go through these things alone. I will never forget when I was at one of my most anxious places in life. Little Miss Catherine Trimble would, if I missed a Sunday at church, she would come. She would come, and she could barely get around. I don't even remember how old she was. She had to be
Yeah.
pushing 90.
I think she was in her 90s when she passed. Yeah.
She would
She was a force too.
yeah, she would honk her horn and make me come outside, and she would bring me the little flyer from church, and she would say, I just want you to know that I missed you this morning and I love you. And if you need me to pray for you, I'll pray for you right now. And never once had I talked to her or opened up about my anxiety, but she helped me through that more than she will ever know. And I'm sure it was just the Lord putting on her heart to check in on me. But if I ever missed a Sunday while she was there, she came by to just let me know, you're missed, you're loved, and I'm checking on you.
I love that.
I love that. I love that she
She's
honked
the
her horn
sweetest
and
little
made
lady.
you get out and go up to her.
All right.
It's like, you need some fresh air. Get out here.
Yes, you gotta come outside. And she didn't care if it was raining or not either.
Yeah,
She
you're
said,
not
"You
going
get
to
out
want
of
to
here."
miss church. Yeah, I think that's what I liked at the company that we had both worked at before I moved back out here, was that we put an emphasis on wellness, and it incorporated the entire body. And spirituality is a part of the entire body, and it's needed. We need to see how the spiritual world comes into our lives and our wellness. And I think a lot of people just think that they're going to be pegged with an identity if they go see a counselor or a therapist, and that can be scary. Instead of seeing it as a chance to get help, it's oh, I just have depression. That's my whole identity now. And they don't have to live with that depression forever if they go seek help. And I don't want that to be a barrier stopping somebody from seeking out the help that they need.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's all of my notes that I wrote.
I think I hit all of my notes too. I do have like a small little challenge. For the ending, if we're ready, I was actually scrolling through Instagram last week before I even started prepping for this, and the pastor of Life Church, Craig Groeschel, I think is his name, he had shared this thing on anxiety, and essentially it was pray, pause, and praise, and it was just pray to God like when you start to feel anxious, like he like reiterated like anxiety is not a sin, depression, and that could go for depression too, but you need to pray about it. You need to seek the Lord. You need to take it to the Lord. You need to pause, and like, in Psalms it says be still and know that I'm God. You need to just like sit in God's presence, and then you need to praise him even if you're still feeling anxious, even if you're still feeling depressed. Praise him before the victory and after the victory and during it too. And so I was like, that is so good. I'm going to write that down and use it. So I have to give him the credit. That was on his Instagram page, but just pray, pause, and praise. And I thought that was so good. I'll probably write it on my mirror, honestly, just so I have it for myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, that ties into cognitive behavioral therapy's 90-second, and it aligns with the same thing. That's a biblical perspective of it. So I really like that because that helps you break a cycle. And if you can take 90 minutes before you let that intrusive thought or that cognitive distortion take hold in your brain, then that 90 seconds of pausing, praying, praising the Lord, you are, like Lexi talked, rewiring that pathway for that thought.
That's cool. Yeah.
That's good. Jennifer, was there anything else that you wanted to talk about while we're on the podcast?
No, this is my life. I mean, my little soapbox I stand on every day. So, anytime you want a mental health perspective or whatever, I'm more than happy to chime in. And I'm human too. I'm going to have perspectives and views that don't align with everybody's, but I think at the end of the day, if we're all just standing on those biblical truths in a way that we're showing that grace and compassion to one another, you can't really misconstrue anything else.
Yeah, that's true. I think that for my challenge of something to do is, and I'm saying this because I've seen it recently. There's a person that's on my social media who has actually made a post about the struggles that she's having. And one of those struggles is finding friends. And we all know how lonely life gets whenever you don't have friends. So start building a community. Even if you're just starting with your family and you go to your family first, and then seek out a church, and don't just go to church, sit in the pews, leave, but start talking to people. Start building communities with people, and because it really is lonely if you're doing life by yourself. And I think what we've reiterated over and over again is that your mental health is going to struggle more if you're isolated and lonely. And so start building communities and deep relationships with people, and just take a step somehow this week to make a new relationship with somebody. That's my challenge.
Love it.
Okay. That's it. I think that's all we got today.
Thanks for joining in the conversation. Yes. We hope that you enjoyed it and that you guys got something out of it. I know that I did. So
yeah. And thank you, Jennifer, for coming on. This was actually her idea for a topic. The day that our first podcast released, she was like coming to us to be like, you know what we should do? So thank you for doing this with us.
Yeah, and thank you for having me and entertaining it. I think it's important, and I think that, it's something that we all kind of need to be mindful of in our fellowship with one another.
Yes, I agree. All right. Well, we hope you guys have a good week, and we hope you enjoy the podcast. Bye, guys.
Bye.